Hello and welcome back. This is episode 29 of Ghost Creatures and Scares Oh My. This episode is called Ghosts and Serial Killers Part 2. In this podcast, we take the entity featured in each episode of the popular show Supernatural and explore creepy real life stories, myths, and legends that surround this theme.
So last time we explored Jack the Ripper, dissecting the popular suspects and sharing our views. This week we continue our look at serial killers with H. Holmes, a notorious American killer of the past, and we dip our toes into the criminal supernatural with the tale of Lavinia Fisher, the murderess of South Carolina. So yeah, we did Jack the Ripper, didn't we, and the suspects of who he could be last week.
Yeah.
In
So,
yeah,
English edition and one to the American edition.
American edition. And H. Holmes was he was in the actual episode of Supernatural, wasn't he?
He was, yeah.
He was the guy going after these women and like locking them in the walls or something
Locking them underground in
in
like
that
the
house.
weird, wasn't a house, it was like a bunk, I think, type thing, wasn't it? Sewers sort of thing.
Yeah, which is based on the real H. Holmes. So that's why we did it this way. And it's interesting on the last one. I'll just start the episode off with something that's been on my mind lately. We did a royal conspiracy theory. Interesting, considering what's going on in the news at the moment.
Yeah, indeed.
Hashtag where is Kate?
Oh my days, don't you get involved.
I'm not throwing my 50 pence into it, but yeah, just interesting link. That's like a story for another day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll dive in. Do you know anything about H. Holmes? I feel like he's not as well known as Jack the Ripper, maybe because it's American, but I still feel like Jack the Ripper is better known.
Yeah, Jared probably is, but so probably just know from what's in the episode, really.
So, yes, I don't think he's one that springs to mind that people would know lots about. Did you know that the character in American Horror Story 4, Evan Peters' character, the kind of like eccentric millionaire guy who builds the hotel and kills loads of people, he's based on H. Holmes.
Was that number four, was it?
Yeah, the Hotel Cortez,
I thought
that
number
one.
four was the circus.
Ooh, you're right, it was. Oh, that's
Oh, that is
embarrassing.
embarrassing for
Should
you,
we
isn't
edit
it?
that out or should I just
Nah,
leave
you
that
leave
in
that
there?
in. Leave that in. I've won you there. Especially
You've won
considering,
us.
especially considering American Horror Story supposed to be your thing.
You know what it is? I was saying, as I was saying number four, I'm thinking it's not, it's number five. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I
Oof,
knew that sounded wrong.
oof.
Oh, that is embarrassing. But we'll keep
Nightmare
it
for you,
in
that,
there.
huh?
Hey, we're all human. Even I can make mistakes. I do every episode. I do actually make a lot of mistakes, which I didn't realize till I started doing this podcast. What's the other one I said when I said JFK got assassinated in was it 19 I got it the wrong. I think it was 1969, wasn't it? And that was the
Yeah.
moon landing.
To be fair, I didn't pick up on it, so I wouldn't
You
worry.
didn't pick on it, but I was listening. I thought, hang on, and then I called Grenfell Tower. Oh, what did I call Grenfell?
Grendel.
Grendel's Tower. Thinking of Beowulf. Right, okay, let's dive in. Let's find out a little bit about H. Holmes, which is kind of he is the American's version of Jack the Ripper, I would say, one of the first recorded serial killers. And I took this from history.com. So the 1893 did it again. The 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, known at the time as the Columbian Exposition, celebrated the 400th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's arrival in the Americas. So yeah, so in 1893 it was celebrating Christopher Columbus's arrival in the Americas, so it was like a themed thing at the time. The enormous exhibition featured many wondrous exhibits, including the United States' first gas-powered motor car,
Daimler.
Daimler. Oh, is that the Doppler effect? Daimler, maybe.
I don't know.
The Daimler quadricycle. Is that how you would say that?
Yeah.
And a £1,500 statue of the Venus de Milo made of chocolate. Whoa, that sounds
It
amazing.
sounds unreal.
However, the World's Fair became better known for a structure that was more gruesome than organisers could ever have imagined. The so-called murder castle of H. Holmes, America's first documented serial killer. So, yeah, we're going back in time a little bit from there. So, the 1893 World Fair, which is, I think it still happens, doesn't it? Like the science fair where they have all the new experiments and things.
I think so, yeah.
Isn't that where, like, on Gremlins,
His
the
dad
dad
goes.
goes? That's what I
I
think.
assume so.
Yeah, like something like that, where it's lots of different people are showing off the different. Like I'm sure the Simpsons have done it as well at the World Fair. So they had the murder castle of H. Holmes. So we'll go back in time because he was the first documented serial killer in America, the first serial killer who killed multiple women in mass. Yeah, but I think there's going to be other ones. I mean, we'll find out. Lavinia Fisher came earlier, and she was killing more than one person.
Yeah.
But anyway, H. Holmes was born Herman Webster Mudgett. No wonder he changed his name. In New Hampshire in 1861. As an adult, he abandoned his young wife and child in 1885 to move to Illinois. Once there, he changed his name to Holmes, reportedly as a homage to the fictional English detective Sherlock Holmes, the literary creation of author Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Soon after his arrival in the Chicago area, Holmes took up work at a pharmacy located near Jackson Park. And 8 years later, Jackson Park would actually become the site of the 1893 World's Fair. The Columbian Exposition, as it was called, was designed by some of America's leading architects, including Frederick Law Olmsted, and included exhibits from more than 40 countries. So I'm guessing it's like all the different creators and scientists from all over the world, inventors, would kind of gravitate towards this area and put these new exhibits on.
Hmm.
So it's probably a real hub for new technology and things. It would have been interesting to see that.
Yeah.
The event attracted more than 27 million visitors to Chicago, an incredible number considering the limited transportation options at the time. I was going to say that's a lot. That's a lot of people for that time not having certain methods of transport and do you know what I mean?
Yeah, not being able to like well, quick travel, really.
Yeah. Holmes took advantage of some of the many visitors to the city, including young women who came to Chicago for jobs at the fairgrounds. Historians believe that Holmes, a masterful and charismatic con artist, had swindled money from his drugstore employers. He purchased an empty lot in the Englewood neighborhood of Chicago, and he built a labyrinthine labyrinthine structure with shops on the first floor and small apartments above. So he purchased this like random plot of land, bought this, built a house, sorry, but it had lots of weird things. It was a bit like a mini version of the Winchester murderer house, mystery house. So it had tunnels, secret drop where it would take you to the cellar and stuff like that.
Oh,
It had secret like walls that were mirrors and stuff, like all that kind of bizarre. Think of
I wonder why.
50 Shades of Grey, like in a more, even more sinister and horrible than 50 Shades of Grey is
Uh,
already.
Basically, just being able to get around his house into each of the rooms where people would be staying.
Ah, yeah, interesting. This edifice became known as Holmes' booby-trapped murder castle. According to sensationalist reports, the space featured soundproof rooms, secret passages, and a disorientating maze of hallways and staircases. The rooms were also allegedly outfitted with trapdoors over chutes that dropped Holmes's unsuspecting victims to the building's basements. So he had all these chutes allegedly where people would drop down, like think of like them cartoons where they fall through the floor,
Yeah.
but they fell like from such a height. It's not funny because they fell from such a height they would break bones and like really cripple themselves, and they were totally vulnerable to him attacking them then. So it was really like horrendous. It's a bit like Home Alone gone really bad.
I was just more thinking of Mr. Burns on The Simpsons.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Like when he drops the
Ah,
thing,
yeah.
yeah, we've got a lot of like I think we grew up with a lot of Simpsons, so that's all our references go to back to the Simpsons.
Everybody's references to go to The Simpsons, really. I mean, they've predicted the future how many times?
Especially with this Wonka thing. Sorry, we're going on a real tangent, but this Wonka thing's very much amused me. This
Ah,
Wonka World in Glasgow. If you haven't seen it, please Google Wonka World in or the Wonka experience in Glasgow. The sad Oompa Loompa. She's like my hero now. But yeah, maybe the
the
unknown was
unknown.
maybe the unknown was in the walls. Um, so the basement, claims said, was a macabre facility of acid vats, lots of quicklime, often used on decaying corpses, and a crematorium which the killer used to finish off his victims. All of these descriptions, however, were described by what were likely over-embellished or even fabricated news reports in the 1890s. But why would newspapers lie? So unlike them. While reports suggest that Holmes killed as many as 200 people in his sinister lair, the actual number of victims may have been much lower. The number of his victims is still debated by historians. So, yeah, it was claimed that 200 people met their grisly end there, but it's not definite that that was the right number. Could have been a lot lower.
Yeah, I mean, but he definitely had the right setup to do that sort of thing. Like, it's great,
Yeah.
that, isn't it?
I don't
Imagine
understand
making
why.
an entire hotel built around, but
It
at the
wasn't so
same,
much a hotel, it was more kind of like apartments.
well, but at the same time, like, surely the word would have spread around that, like, after, say, 10. 10 people have died in this
Not really, if they're
apartment.
all out of towners,
I suppose,
drifters,
yeah, I suppose you're
young
right.
young women who've come to do work, or young people from different countries who've travelled over. They're not going to have. It's a big. As much as big cities are crowded, it's more easy to get lost in the crowds, I think.
Yeah,
And he's went unnoticed in a time before
it could have been easily
internet and stuff.
200 then, really.
Could have been. I mean, maybe not, but it sounds like a lot. And what I don't understand is, maybe like this is a naive thing to say, but why do people, how are people born, or are they born with, this is like a different debate, with such, like, why would you want to like kill and hurt people?
Yeah,
Like, I was at work today and there was a worm on the ground, and I deliberately stepped over that worm. As you know what I mean? Because I would feel bad to stand on that worm. But these people would like do this to other people.
yeah. They're sick, aren't they, clearly?
Yeah, but I just find it really bizarre.
I don't think they were born that way, but something must have went wrong,
Do you not
when they
think?
were young.
It's a nature versus nurture debate.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think there's got to be something in you.
Yeah, I suppose. I
It's
don't
got to
know.
be. You're born bad or you become bad.
Hard to say, innit?
Yeah, that's one for another day. But anyway, how did he get caught? He was apprehended soon after he fled Chicago in October 1893, following the conclusion of the World's Fair. He was arrested in Boston and eventually suspected of murdering his assistant, Benjamin Pietzell, and two of his children. Interestingly, while on the run, Holmes had misled Pietzell's wife as well. He was collecting the insurance money for his former assistant and living with the widow and three of their children. Police eventually discovered the body of one of the murdered children, and this was the discovery that led to Holmes's arrest. Following his arrest, Holmes claimed to have killed more than 200 people in his murder castle. He ultimately confessed to murdering his assistant Pietzel and two of his daughters. And experts now believe he may have in fact as killed as few as 9. Still a significant number, but not the scores the killer claimed. So he was the one that was saying he killed 200, but historians are saying it could have actually just been between 9 and like in the teens,
Oh,
which is still when you think
well, horrible amount.
it is, but when
More
you,
than Jack the Ripper as well.
yeah, interesting that. But 200 is he? I think he's an attention seeker.
Well, clearly, aye, but I mean,
Not many killers admit to doing it, but not only that, admitting to doing like how many more.
200 of them, and aye.
So he's
But I
he's
mean, he could, like I say, he could very easily. I mean, why do they believe it was only 9? It's because they can only find evidence for 9. But then, if they were out of towners and nobody knew about them,
mm,
could never really say, could you?
yeah, true. So while in captivity, of course, this is what he did. Awaiting his trial and sentencing, Holmes authored an autobiography, Holmes's own story, in which he wrote, "I could not help the fact that I was a murderer, no more than the poet can help the inspiration to sing,"
My days.
which is quite a poetic thing to write,
It's
but a
a
narcissist, isn't
clear
he?
narcissist, and
They
he's,
all tend to be.
yeah.
He's like this like
That's the
reeks of
thing, and it always
Manson.
want to get caught so that
Yeah.
they can claim what they've done.
Well, I think it's like people like Manson. They get to a point where they realize they're not going to be famous for something of what they want to do, so they're that determined to be remembered. They think, well, I'm going to have to do this.
See, this was the difference with Jack the Ripper, is that he was never ever caught.
Oh,
Nobody ever
are you
knew that
like
he
a
was.
Jack the Ripper fangirl or something?
In what world? Just saying.
Yeah, he
Just a
didn't want to be
curious one, is it,
caught.
that he was never caught?
Yeah, but he wasn't doing it for the fame, I don't think. He was just a
Uh,
sicko.
yeah.
Obviously this one's a sicko as well, but a lot of these people, like who else? Maybe Bundy to an extent. They just want to be the cream of the Manson, definitely. The
Uh,
cream of the like infamy, don't they? It's just they're definitely like narcissists, like psychopaths. Um, the most famous literary work in Holmes, however, is the best-selling non-fiction novel The Devil in the White City, written by Eric Larson, which was published in 2003. After a brief incarceration, Holmes was hanged for his crimes in Philadelphia in 1896, and his body is buried in Holy Cross Cemetery outside the Pennsylvania city. Despite Holmes's arrest and execution, rumors have persisted for more than a century that the serial killer bribed authorities to avoid punishment. The theory suggests that Holmes was allowed to escape and the officials hanged another man. In response to these rumours, in March 2017, Holmes's descendants, who live in Delaware, petitioned to have his remains exhumed so they could go undergo DNA testing. The results concluded that the remains did in fact belong to Holmes. Meanwhile, the fate of the killer's home is still shrouded in intrigue. With Holmes allegedly safely ensconced in prison, in 1895 the murder castle was gutted by fire after witnesses reportedly saw two men entering the building late one night. The building itself remained standing until 1938, when it was torn down. The site is now occupied by the Englewood branch of the US Post Office. So that's interesting. That allegedly two people set it on fire.
Aye.
Is that a cover up, do you think? Or just an act of like like what's the word? Vandalism because he was so hated in the area, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, on Supernatural, it's they use it as like a hotel, don't they? And like it's the stuff underneath.
Hmm. Yeah, but that's just like fiction.
Yeah.
But what would be the reason for it to be covered up, do you think?
Unless there was. I mean, to be fair, they might have just not wanted anybody to ever get use of all the stuff that was there, because maybe they could never have found like all the traps. You don't want people going in and then
Um,
potentially dying, do you? Looking for all these traps that he had.
True. Yeah, I just think it's a bit strange that one. So we're going to move on. So I wanted to finish off this two episodes that we've done, these two episodes that we've done, with a more of a link to the supernatural because we've been on a bit of a tangent with this one, haven't we? We've veered into the world of true crime. So I've managed to find a story that combines both true crime in America, but also a bit of the supernatural as well. I hadn't heard of this person. Have you heard of Lavinia Fisher?
I'm sure we've watched a documentary at
Do you
some point. The
think?
name rings a bell, but I couldn't tell you why.
I've never heard of her, but do you want to find out what she did?
Come on then.
What terrible things she got up to?
It better not be kids, is it?
What? I don't know.
Killing loads of kids, anything? No, sorry, continue.
Okay. No, just puppies. Is that okay?
Oh,
I'm joking, I'm
no.
joking.
However,
Sorry, it's too easy. So she is being coined by many as the first female serial killer in the United States, a title that she may not deserve, but her wickedness definitely cannot be argued. Lavinia and her husband John Fisher lived in Charleston, South Carolina. Together they owned and operated an inn, the 6 Mile Wayfarer House. Back in the early 1800s, inns were placed outside of towns and were like rest stops for folks that had been travelling. A bit like the modern day diner, suppose, a lot of pit
mm,
stop along the way.
yeah,
They were a place to water and feed your horse, have a bite to eat, and perhaps a bed to sleep in for the night.
probably
But
more like motels in America.
yeah, yeah, like a diner slash motel. It's like a pit stop for the night
Yeah.
along the way. So you got to imagine these places are very sparse in between, and they're set out in the sticks in between different towns, probably. So that they're very remote, which would mean that she'd probably get away with doing what she did.
Aye.
Um, There may have been some gambling that would take place inside the inns, as well as some other extracurricular activities. I think that means prostitution.
Yeah.
But all in the name of early capitalism. And their names were less than creative since they served as mile markers for the town or the city. So that makes sense. So they were called things like 6 Mile House, 5 Mile House, 4 Mile House. They didn't have like fancy names. They were called like what they were. It's
The
six
all, yeah,
miles.
the all
Yeah,
the same.
it's letting you know this inn that you've come to now, you've got 4 miles to go to the next town. So that's quite clever actually. Rumours and concerns began to generate around the Charleston community, and reports were made to the local sheriff that people had started to disappear after visiting the 6 Mile House. There wasn't much evidence to substantiate these reports, and because John and Lavinia were attractive and a well liked couple, nothing ever came of the concerns. But eventually, some of Charleston's vigilantes decided to take the investigations into their own hands. The country of America was young in 1819. We were dealing with pirates and privateers on our seas and in our port cities. And for many who made their living on land, it was in trades, and everything was fair game for trade people, livestock, harvest, or whatever else they had that the others wanted. These were America's first entrepreneurs, the early days of a hustle. Driving your wagon into town with the hopes of selling your goods wasn't always a simple or safe process. Full wagons were often hijacked by highwaymen as they approached the town and robbed of the goods they were trading. Or they may be ambushed on their way out of town and robbed of the money that they'd just made selling their goods. Charleston was a major port city, which brought in plenty of traders and kept the highwaymen busy. The stories began when unsuspecting men were lured into a few of the inns to join in poker games, only then to be cheated out of their money by crooked gambling practices and scams. In addition to these complaints made by the men who had just lost their earnings in what they thought were gentlemen's gambles, a man named Stephen Lacoste reported that his cow had been stolen out of his pasture. It seemed that these highwaymen had moved on from hijacking and gambling and the outright thievery of locals. The citizens of Charleston decided they'd have enough. They were not going to let these bandits cause more problem for their city's already struggling economy. They set out on February the 16th, 1819, a well-armed, organised mob operating under Lynch's law, taking matters into their own hands. Their destination was 5 Mile House. So Lavinia Fisher versus the Lynch mob. There is something delightfully intriguing about a female criminal. Some would say that's a sexist statement, but one has to admit that the idea of a woman choosing to kill is creepy. Lavinia Fisher was said to be an attractive young woman, beguiling to some, which definitely ups the creep factor. I didn't write this, by the way, so I wouldn't use the phrase creep factor. But a killer, that's questionable. The Lynch mob had arrived at 5 Mile House and ordered the small group inside to vacate. The group protested, and the Lynch mob set the building on fire. It didn't take long for the 5 Mile House to burn to the ground, which set the mob's adrenaline racing. Next, they were on to the 6 Mile Wayfarer House to complete their mission of homegrown justice. The mob barreled into the 6 Mile House and gave the same orders. You have 15 minutes to vacate, or we set the house on fire. The occupants of the 6 Mile House complied, probably because they had smelled the smoke and heard the hubbub that came from the 5 Mile House moments earlier. Once all had left the premises, the mob placed David Ross inside the house to watch over the property. The Lynch mob returned to Charleston feeling proud that they had successfully served their own brand of justice. Even the local newspaper, the Charleston Courier, reported their successes on Saturday, February the 20th, 1819. But poor David Ross must not have realised that being the 6 Mile House watchman was quickly going to turn into a precarious and dangerous position. As Mr. Ross stood watch, the occupants who had been driven out of the 6 Mile House returned, and they were angry. They violently attacked Mr. Ross, but somehow he managed to escape into the woods and get back to Charleston. When he arrived, he gave a sworn affidavit to the authorities of the events that happened at 6 Mile House. So a William Hayward, who was in possession of the 6 Mile House, I think he must have been working alongside this Lavinia Fisher and her husband John. When Mr. Ross came up and stood against him, apparently he was very violent and he became more and more violent. Hayward put his hands into Mr. Ross's bosom and said, You damned infernal rascal, if you lay your hand on anything, I will blow your brains out. And now enters our dastardly lady of the hour, Lavinia Fisher and her husband John Fisher. Fisher and his wife Lavinia came up with 2 other men whose names are unknown. He said that Lavinia Fisher laid violent hands upon him, choked and boxed his head through a pan of window glass. Whilst he was endeavouring to get away from them, Hayward and Fisher beat him mercilessly, with loaded whips aided and assisted by the other 2 men. There was also another woman who was aided and assisted them while they were beating him. He leapt out of the house and crossed the road through to the woods, and he got to the 4 Mile House. But just as he had entered the woods, they fired at him, and he got at least to the main road and on his way into town. Apparently, Mr. Ross was incredibly agile to escape such an overpowering and violent crew. When he made it back to Charleston, he recalled hearing Fisher screamed, You damned infernal rascal, if I ever catch you, I will give you 100 lashes. Infernal rascal. Hollywood couldn't write that, Jewel.
It's true.
That is
You
true.
bloody rascal, you.
2 hours later, even, John Peoples, who was watering his horses at the 6 Mile House, also claimed to have been attacked and robbed. He too gave a sworn affidavit alleging that Lavinia and John Fisher were part of the gang that so cruelly beat him and threatened his life. Now the law steps in. So it has been alleged, it doesn't really go into it, that this was just something that she got caught doing. And it wasn't just her. I don't know why they're holding on this woman because it was all the men as well.
Aye.
That they were like a gang operating out of the inn, and they were targeting these men who were traveling, and sometimes killing them or sometimes just robbing them.
Was this not in a film?
Where it's a bit like it's like a highway.
I'm sure this was in a film though. Like, I'm sure there's a film where a load of people, there's some people in
It's a bit like it happens in Outlander.
there's some people in a hotel or a motel, and a couple of people start dying. And then when it gets towards the end, you realise it's actually a load of them who are working together and killing these few off.
Like a modern film or
Like 2000s, early
oh,
2000s.
House of Wax.
Nah,
I
not
don't
House of
know, no
Wax.
idea.
Can't think.
The capture of Lavinia and John Fisher. Two victims who were also eyewitnesses, and their affidavits. What's an affidavit? Is that like a statement? That
Yeah, I think
like a
is
sworn
it not
statement?
like a
We had to do
sworn
that
statement to
when we are
like
going to get
people?
married, weren't we? Well, we did get married, but when we're going to get married abroad,
Yeah.
is that what it is? Is that just all it
Well, it's normally
means?
something you'd have to give to the police and that as well, isn't it? To
Oh, is it like a sworn something like a spoken?
like a statement. Like a statement.
Hmm.
I think anyway.
So anyway, they got the sheriff involved. This sheriff, Nathaniel Green Cleary, gathered a party of men and set out for the 6 Mile Wayfarer house. And in my head, I like to think that they were carrying pitchforks and shouting things like,
Torches
yeah, like
on fire.
rebel, 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 that kind of. They surrounded the property, locked and loaded, and were prepared for a fight. But without any drama, the gang of criminals surrendered. Oh.
Hmm.
Some stories say that John didn't want to put his wife Lavinia in harm's way. Ah, that's what reminds us of Bonnie and Clyde. It's a bit
Hmm.
like Bonnie and Clyde, like an early version. And that's why he surrendered without resistance. John and Lavinia Fisher, James McElroy, Zeph Young, and Jane Howard were taken into custody and loaded into a paddy wagon for their 6 mile ride straight to the city jail on Charleston's Magazine Street. Some of the sheriff's posse stayed behind to go through the contents of the house and the outbuildings where they found the hide of a freshly slaughtered cow. They immediately speculated that this was the cow that had reportedly gone missing a few days earlier. Once the sweep of the insides had been completed, 6 Mile House and the outbuildings were set on fire and burned to the ground, leaving nothing behind of the supposed rest stop of horrors but ash and embers. Whilst in the city jail, John and Lavinia tried to escape, but the plan was foiled when the rope that carried John down from the window broke and left Lavinia stranded. John wouldn't leave Lavinia. I think that's really romantic. They've won me over.
Other
Yeah,
on their
doesn't
side.
take much. They were taken back into custody and held with much tighter security, and one wonders if Lavinia would have done the same for John. No, I
Mm-hmm.
don't think, but that's how it should be, in my opinion.
Just go without us living. No bother, mate. I'm off.
It's the Titanic theory, like
Um,
men should, that's really
definitely enough room.
sexist.
There was definitely enough room on there for two.
Mm, it might have been, but would you risk getting flipped over? Because if you got flipped over in that icy cold water, you'd never get back on. I bet it took some effort for him to get her on there. He made a sacrifice, and she lived a good life.
Fool.
Yeah. You know my heart's with I
Yeah.
call him. Oh, what did they call him in the thing?
Oh,
And I can't remember his name in real life. Oh my
the
gosh.
original fiance, is it?
Yeah, I can't think of him. No, I love him. Oh, I can't think of what his name. He's a bit of an arse in it, but he's got nice hair. Oh, what's his name in real life? That's going to drive us nuts. Google it when I'm reading this bit. So, some more stories of Lavinia Fisher. Taking a tour in Charleston, you will undoubtedly hear the version of the Lavinia Fisher story. The most popular one talks about her nefarious ways of luring travellers into the 6 Mile Wayfarer house for a lovely dinner and conversation, only to then send them off to bed with a cup of her oleander poisoned tea. As the male travellers fall into a deep sleep, she would steal their money and belongings as her husband would ensure her death by stabbing them. So yeah, so the theory that she would it's Billy Zane, by the way, everyone. The theory is that it would they would kind of lure these people, oh, go and have a nice restful night, have a bowl of soup, have some extra beer that'll get you nice and liquored up, and then they would rob them, and sometimes they would kill them to ensure that they wouldn't tell on them, I suppose.
Must have been the one too, like maybe woke up or something while they were nicking stuff.
Yeah, or even just ones that they wanted rid of them. The new know they were passing through. No one would, bit like H. Holmes. They took opportunity of these traders who were passing from town to town. And America was such a big place that you would never know who was coming and going.
Yeah.
So if they let them go, they'd just go to the local sheriff and complain. So they they did it that way, I suppose. It was, I mean that's the motive for their crime. Another juicy Lavinia Fisher story introduces a mysterious trapdoor into her arsenal of murder tactics. As the lone traveller lies asleep from a specially blended tea, probably full of drugs of some sort, Lavinia would allegedly pull a lever that opened a trapdoor into the floor. The bed would collapse and drop the poor sleeping victim into a pit in the basement of the house. Many like to add to the embellishment, say that there were spikes at the bottom of the pit which impaled the victims as they landed. That I don't believe that in
Don't
a
think there
in
was
a in
spikes
an
like.
early 1800s house with like quite poor people. They weren't rich or they weren't inventing things like H. Holmes. So
Uh,
I don't believe that one. Not surprisingly, there isn't any proof of either of these stories. Bruce Orr has done extensive research for his book, 6 Miles to Charleston, the true story of John and Lavinia Fisher. And if any of those stories had merits of truth, he would have found them. He does, however, reveal Charleston's dark history and paints an image of the holy city that doesn't seem so holy. Sordid tales of Lavinia Fisher aren't always accurately delivered, and after a lot of historical excavation, it could be that John and Lavinia Fisher weren't as bad as modern storytellers portray them to be. Greedy and unscrupulous, sure. Murderers, it isn't actually proven. And if you think when the men at the time went and ransacked the house, all they found was a cow.
Yeah,
They,
surely we'll have found something else.
they didn't find any bodies. So I think that this story should might not have even been a killer.
Yeah,
Maybe not. We don't know. It's actually not really proven. But either way, like I said, Lavinia and John are commonly portrayed as the 19th century's answer to Bonnie and Clyde, which gives them it's romanticised it, a bit like Jack the Ripper has been romanticised.
yeah.
The hanging of Lavinia Fisher. John and Lavinia Fisher appeared before the Constitutional Court on January 17th, 1820. It was reported in the Charleston Courier that they were convicted of highway robbery, so they weren't actually convicted of murder, and they were condemned to be hanged on Friday, February 4th, 1820. It appears that the original charges of assault with the intent to murder were off the table. Now, John and Lavinia were going to hang for the robbery upon John Peoples, the second victim who gave the affidavit to authorities. It's a bit confusing on why John and Lavinia Fisher were convicted of a crime against Mr. Ross, but sentenced to death for a crime against Mr. Peoples, which they were never convicted of. But it seems the system wasn't always in favour of due process in the early 19th century. Governor Geddes received a wealth of pleas from John and Lavinia Fisher, local clergy, and respectable citizens, asking for a time of respite from the February 4th execution day, for John and Lavinia to prepare to meet their God. The governor granted the requests and reset their execution date 2 weeks later. Lavinia believed that the additional 2 weeks granted would ensure her a pardon, and her declares of innocence would be all that she needed to set her free. In their last 2 weeks behind the walls of the city jail, John and Lavinia spent time with Reverend Dr. Richard Furman. The Reverend had a Baptist ministry and a significant influence in the development of the Baptist denomination. The Reverend was determined to prepare the Fishers' souls for the afterlife. The preparation was received welcomingly by John, but Lavinia Fisher didn't have the patience for prayer. She was consumed with professing her innocence and not believing that the governor would hang a woman. When the date of the execution arrived, a coach awaited the Fishers and their executioner to deliver them to the gallows. The Fishers walked arm in arm from the prison door to the coach and began their procession to their fate. A large crowd had gathered. The Fishers had become celebrities in Charleston, and Lavinia was being made an example of as the first woman sentenced to hang in the Holy City. It is documented that upon the Fishers' arrival, John Fisher turned pale and his body began to tremor uncontrollably while inside the carriage. He grabbed for Lavinia and pulled her close to him. Seconds later, the Fishers and their executioner exited the carriage. John bravely climbed the scaffolds, but Lavinia refused. Constables were forced to drag her as she screamed for the crowd to rescue her, imploring for their pity and professing her innocence. As the clock was ticking on the gallows, Lavinia's desperation turned to profanity and curses. She damned the governor to hell and stomped her feet. John lovingly pleaded with Lavinia. He asked her to make peace with God, but she refused, only to speak the words that are to this day repeated as part of the Lavinia Fisher story. Cease, I will have none of it. Save your words for others that want them. But if you have a message you want sent to hell, then give it to me. I'll carry it. That's a good end to go, isn't it?
Ah,
It's a bit
yeah.
like them films where the witch makes a curse and then it curses the town when they get executed.
Ah, it's such a
So
should have said, really, innit? Just for
yeah,
getting people's minds.
I think it's sad actually. And the only listen how young you were because you presume in my head I've got people in the 40s. I don't know why.
Yeah, picturing people's some 40s.
29-year-old John and 28-year-old Lavinia were hanged at 2 o'clock on February 18th, 1820. The Charleston Courier reported on February 19th that the couple embraced as the signal was given and the drop fell. Lavinia died almost instantly, but it took a few minutes for John to expire. Their bodies were taken down from the ropes and buried at Potter's Field.
What a way to say it. To expire.
Isn't it a bit, yeah, bit quite romantic in a way,
Yeah,
in a gothic kind of way, maybe.
get a grip.
It's like Bonnie and Clyde, isn't it? I think. But but do you think people live like such different, obviously, but the lives were so
They
jam-packed.
had done quite a bit in only their
That's
29 and
what I
28
mean. Like,
years, and it's nuts that.
yeah. So we'll finish off with the alleged ghost of Lavinia Fisher. Lavinia is a favourite on ghost tours. Many say that she still haunts the old city jail, and others claim that she actually haunts the cemetery, which is odd considering that she was never buried in that certain cemetery, but they're ghost stories after all. Paranormal experts would say that because she was filled with so much anger and defiance when she was executed, it would be expected that her spirit never found peace. And that's what people say, isn't it? That these ghosts often were people who were killed in quite violent and unexpected ways. And it was such a shock to the system that the
They
ghost
can't
still,
accept it.
yeah, and the ghost still lingers there. It could be energy that's still there. Um, this may cause her to roam and haunt the last areas that she knew and where she felt the most unsettled in life. Places like the old city jail and where the gallows once stood. There's something else just as disturbing as her questionable sentence and town hanging, something even more macabre than the ghost of an alleged criminal. It's gawking at her bones. The Yorkville Inquirer posted proudly on August the 8th, 1922, skeleton on display. The article goes on to explain that Lavinia Fisher's skeleton was exhibited at the Charleston Museum some time ago and was removed because it was out of order. The museum had decided against to install them and now it has been put in order. So that's a bit confusing. They put basically they put in the 20s they put a skeleton on display,
Yeah.
which might have caused some wrath in the spirit to
Kick off,
become
yeah, aye,
yeah.
so staring at your bones for.
The Yorkville Inquirer continues to write about the infamous Lavinia and John Fisher and what they were hanged for. Considerable curiosity was aroused over the continued disappearance of those who stopped overnight at their hostel or inn. It was found that the guests had been murdered and their bones buried in the cellar. But you can't help but wonder if Lavinia's story grew into such a tall tale immediately after she saw her unjust demise on the gallows, or if it took a few decades to grow. Perhaps her ghost does roam the downtown streets of Charleston, angry and bitter at her mistreatment and her life cut short. Or maybe she's just looking for her bones. Dot dot dot. Thoughts? Do you think there's any possibility that she could have been a ghost and that Holmes could be still knocking around, that Jack the Ripper could still be lurking in the streets of London? Is there any link between true crime and ghosts?
Maybe Jack the Ripper's secretly a vampire, and
Oh,
therefore would still be lurking around.
werewolf. They were like
Yeah,
disemboweled, weren't
aye,
they?
well, aye.
Oh.
Could be a werewolf.
Has anyone ever thought of that?
Do you know? Maybe I'm the first. Put
I
put
said
my.
it.
I said vampire. You've took the leap from that to werewolf.
I said werewolf.
Look, yeah, try to take my accomplishments.
Isn't that ironic? Because you're Mr. Werewolf and I would prefer vampire.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah,
Uh,
topsy turvy.
Turvy.
Said turvy.
I know it's turvy.
No, it's
Topsy turvy, innit?
topsy turvy with a V.
You sure?
Yeah.
Don't worry about that, you know.
Google it, and we're keeping this in. All the times you've made a jerk of me on here.
I don't know. I made a joke of
So
you half
just to
once.
clarify, I think it's topsy turvy, and Matty's trying to tell me it's topsy turvy, like some kind of rogue Teletubby character. Teletubby.
You might be right. I can't believe that. My life's just been changed.
Topsy turvy.
Topsy turvy, I thought it was.
Okay, on that note, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Ghost Creatures and Scares. Oh my, please do give us a follow on Instagram and try and give us a watch on YouTube as well. So thanks for listening.
Next time, we're continuing with terrifying stories of ghosts who warn of impending disaster. See you soon. Hello and welcome back. This is episode 29 of Ghost Creatures and Scares Oh My. This episode is called Ghosts and Serial Killers Part 2. In this podcast, we take the entity featured in each episode of the popular show Supernatural and explore